Hi, I'm Mort Greenberg, proud husband, father, and grandfather. Live in Scottsdale, Arizona, enjoying the sun and the pretty temperature on this cold January day in Omaha. I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey, on March 16, 1922, which means I'm 83 years old at this point. I've had a great life, and I've enjoyed almost every minute of those 83 plus years. The My parents were Aaron and Blanche Greenberg, and I am one of four children in that family. My oldest brother Meyer was 8 years older than I. He eventually became a rabbi and spent his career at Hillel and at the University of Maryland, and created the Hebrew program and then the program on all Near East studies. My second sibling was my brother Av, who was 6 years older than I. My brother became a lawyer, practiced in New York City. Um, Both of my brothers went to yeshiva college as part of the family pattern and tradition. My sister Ruth was born in 1918, and she is 4 years older than I. My sister is 87, is now living in Toms River, New Jersey. Unfortunately, has been ill, and so she's semi-invalided. My sister spent many years on the staff at Vassar College, as a major volunteer within the conservative synagogue movement. And after her first husband died, she met her second husband, who had been the president of United Synagogue of America. Proud grandfather of three children here in Arizona. Well, let me back up and tell you my children. I have three children. My oldest child is Sarah, who is an attorney. Sarah went to Harvard and has degrees, a bachelor's there, a master's in social work at Washington University, and then an LLB from Creighton. So Sarah's had several careers and has spent the last number of years working in Washington for the federal government in the Bureau, in the Dispute Resolution Department of the Bureau of Land Management. My second child is my son Alan, who went to Tulane and then went to Nebraska Medical School, and is an anesthesiologist and lives here in Scottsdale, and is the proud father of three very wonderful grandchildren. My youngest child is Nancy, who went to Northern Colorado University and lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, and has her master's in accounting and functions as a CPA in private accounting firms in Colorado. Our grandchildren are three that my son and his wife Cindy Apple Greenberg have, and the oldest is Zachary Aaron, who is now just turned 18, senior in high school, and is going through the usual chores of college admissions search. Zach is an accomplished student, an international baccalaureate honors program participant, has been captain of his high school basketball team for the last 2 years. Spent last summer in Israel as a member of the United States Youth Maccabi team, one of 12 young people who represented the entire Jewish community in the United States in that program. His sister, Mari, is now 15, almost 16, is a sophomore in high school, a beauty, an outstanding student, and a highly skilled soccer player. She has not yet started to talk about college and what she hopes to do in the future, but she's a charmer. The youngest child is Jordan, who is about to turn 13. Jordan spent last summer, while they were in Israel, and had her bar mitzvah in Jerusalem, officiated by our temple rabbi who was studying there on his sabbatical at that time. Jordan is the most vivacious of the three. I think the most outgoing of the three, the most loving, expressive of the three, although we have no complaints about the others. They are magnificent people and a real joy to us, and validated our decision to come to Scottsdale upon our retirement so we could enjoy our children and our grandchildren. This is not to slight the other children that we have, and although we are not really a blended family, we consider Howard, Marcia, and Steve to be our children, and the grandchildren of Dan and Paige and Amy and Jason, Lisa, David, and Kimberly to be our grandchildren. And we've had the opportunity to share much of their lives, including the Omaha grandchildren. And to our joy, it's really been a very wonderful aspect of our life here during these past 15 years.
I'd like to hear about your growing up,
Okay.
Mort.
I grew up in a modern Orthodox religious family. And my father was a skilled craftsman, had his own little painting business. My mother was a magnificent wife, mother, caretaker, caregiver. Obviously, Jewish practice and then Jewish education was key in our lives. So I started my schooling in a little yeshiva in Jersey City until it went out of business during the Depression. And then when I went to public school, of course, I went to 5-day-a-week Hebrew school after public school. So we had pretty full days. When I finished the public school process, including, when I graduated from the Talmud Torah eventually when I was in 11th grade, and spent a year doing supplementary Jewish study in New York at a place called Herzliya Teachers Institute. So, because that's what modern Jews did, my father's view was that an intense Jewish education plus an intense secular education was essential for proper functioning in the American scene for a good Jewish person to be able to identify in both worlds. As a result, all three of us boys went to yeshiva college. And my sister she went to a public university. She had a supplementary activity and study at a Teachers Institute in New York. So although at that point we still lived in Jersey City, we did a lot of schlepping and a lot of traveling on the subway system and the bus system, and really ended up with very little free time. Much of my Jewish study, and I'm thinking about yeshiva, we were off Friday afternoon and Shabbat, but school there was regular school on Sunday. It was a full normal day, kind of like what happens in Israel at this point. I enjoyed the pleasures of both in Young Judea when I was younger, and then AZA as when I was on the high school level. And they were very fulfilling and socially necessary and desirable. Okay. I was fortunate that I was able to finish college before I went into the military service.
I'd like to hear about your military service.
It is interesting because I tried to get into the Navy in one of their officer training programs and discovered in the process of a physical that I was colorblind, and therefore I was disqualified despite my protestation that I could be good to find camouflaged items. It just didn't work. And then I was invited to join the United States Army. So in March of 1943, I became a member of the Army of the United States of America. Now, I had finished college. I had done a little work out in the community. And just a word about the introduction to my induction to the Army. We walked from home to meet the bus to take us that would take me off to the Army. We being my mother and dad. It happened to be on Shabbos. And the bus stop was in front of our synagogue. Now, this was very difficult for my parents, although they understood, hey, you got to do what you got to do. My father, bless his soul, took me aside that morning and said, they're going to serve you non-kosher food in the Army, and you have to eat it, because you have to be strong to be able to perform your duties in the Army. So even though it's not kosher, you just have to do it. And many times afterwards, I thought about what it took for my father to say this to me, and what it took for my parents to walk me to shul that day. And I got on the bus, literally right in front of the synagogue, and they walked up the steps to our synagogue. It had to be a tremendously tough day for them. Of the three of us boys, I was the first one to be inducted into the military. My oldest brother, Meyer, had been drafted in the pre-war draft and had been called for his physical. It was a Friday morning that he went off for this process. And my mother, contrary to her normal behavior, took to the couch. My mother never took to a couch. My mother never spent Friday not preparing for Shabbat. And she wasn't sobbing, she was just lying there. At noontime, we got a telephone call from my brother that he was rejected because he had poor eyesight. Well, I remember my mother jumping up from that couch and rushing into the kitchen and preparing every goodie that she could think of, so that this Shabbat was a very happy kind of an event. And then on another Shabbat, I go off to the military. I can't imagine, and I'm glad I wasn't there to see how my parents reacted when they got home from shul. It had to be very tough for them. Eventually, my other brother, Av, went to the military, and my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, went to the Navy. In later years, and this is a jump in time, my older brother decided, when he finished his rabbinical school, decided he wanted to be a chaplain in the military. And he wrote to me, and I wrote him back and said, don't do it. We were 4 boys in our family, including my brother-in-law. 3 are in service. Somebody has to be home for our parents. And bless him, he listened, and so he stayed. My military experience has some comedic effects and some more significant effects. I was going to be a lawyer, and so I studied political science and economics and sociology in college. So here I go to the Army and have a very nice score on the Army IQ test. And the Army decides to assign me to an outfit known as combat engineers. Now, what's a liberal arts student doing in something called engineers? I never had an engineering kind of experience in my life. Certainly never had a combat experience. So we trained, because the Army in its wisdom knew what it was doing. So we trained, and we learned how to lay mines and remove mines, and set booby traps and remove booby traps, to use explosives to blow up things or to remove them. We built bridges, in addition to the usual combat infantry training. Okay. We discovered later, when several of us made inquiries about the opportunity to go enter into an officer training program, the OCS, we were told that our outfit would not permit any kind of exclusions. The only way to get out of our outfit at that point was to be injured or dead. We were designed specifically for the invasion of northern France. Now, it's kind of amazing when you think about the preparation, because this was 1.25 years before the invasion. And we were trained in assault and all kinds of other activities which would be needed in that kind of process. And they were not ready to let us go anyplace else. So we went through the usual kind of military experience and training and going out into the desert. And I got to California once. I went out into the Yuma desert. That was the first time Yuma was Arizona, and we were on the California side. That was my first trip to Arizona in the middle of the summer, which was not exactly the most exciting thing in the world. Went to England to prepare for the invasion, and we landed in northern France on Utah Beach the day after the invasion from a ship that was sunk. Our transport ship was sunk by a mine, and we landed on the ground without any weapons. Fortunately, survived that whole experience. We had more deaths and injuries in our company from mines, booby traps. Then we had thinking about it from combat. Although we lost men from rifle fire and machine gun fire. We experienced. We went all the way across France. Never got to Paris. Built bridges built bridges across the Seine River in the town of Melun, so south of Paris, and hit the Hürtgen forest. Hit Aachen, Germany, as our first stop in Germany. We were bombed. We were shelled. We were part of the group that in the front line that broke out of Normandy when the people there was a massive air bombardment to herald the breakthrough and to destroy the German defenses, except some bombs fell on the American side and killed the commanding general, General McNair, of the army at that point, of the U.S. Army. We got to Germany, and the war was different. We were caught in the Belgian Bulge. We were caught in the Battle of the Bulge. And we were in the Hürtgen Forest where we were infantry during a horrible place. Lost members of our squad. Finally we built bridges. No, first we built a bridge across the Roar River under fire. It was the first time we saw jet airplanes, and they dropped bombs on our area of work. Then we were able to build the second bridge across the Rhine River, which was fascinating. It's like a giant erector set, floating erector set, and floated in two sections so that tanks and heavy equipment could go across the river. Three major factors in that terms of the war. One, in April of 1945, I came to the first slave labor camp. This was something I couldn't talk about. Didn't talk about it until maybe just a couple of years ago, on the 50th anniversary of the liberation of the camps, when I was invited by the local New American Holocaust survivor group to speak on behalf of the American service people. That was the first time I spoke about the military experience to anybody, including my children or my grandchildren. It was as if that was just one piece of my life that I didn't care to share, because much of it was horrible. The camp we went to was one of the camps at Nordhausen. When we arrived in the community, when we arrived from the west, from the west, going eastwards to the outskirts of the community of that city, there was a tremendous odor in the air. And we went through the city to the eastern side, where the camp was. And there we found all the horror pictures that you saw of emaciated bodies, with some survivors. And our job, we were there the day after the gates were broken down by American tankers who had gone through. And they actually liberated the camp. We were there to try to provide some help to those who survived, and then to do something about the rows and rows of bodies that were out there in the courtyard and in the hovels, garage-like structures where these people lived. At that camp, That was one of the sites where they built the rockets, the V1, V2 rockets that they were using against, that the Germans were using against England. And so we went into one of the caves in the mountain and saw the parts of the rocket that they had been working on. Well, we did what we could, which was not a lot. And of course, following that, General Eisenhower insisted that every American soldier, officer who could be spared from his immediate duty had to visit one of these camps, because they needed to understand what they were fighting against, and it was not just propaganda. And now let me segue. I mentioned before that I had never spoken about this, and I finally agreed to do it at the request of the Holocaust survivor people at the 50th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. We worked very hard, we being my editor, advisor, director, manager, Mickey, and me, putting together a relatively brief statement. When I finished, this was held in the largest synagogue in the community at that time, with an expanded audience. There was over 1,000 people in attendance. I was speaking from the Bima. I was one of the speakers in the program, speaking from the Bima in front of the Ark of that synagogue. When I finished and sat down, and the next speaker, who was the rabbi of that synagogue, began his speech, a slight gentleman came down the center aisle of the shul, walked up on the bima, knelt down in front of me and grabbed my hands and said, "I was one of those people you helped." I was stunned and absolutely didn't know what to do. I couldn't interrupt the rabbi. And this gentleman thanked me, then turned around and went back to his seat. Obviously, that was a terrific moment in my life. Let me tell you about another moment. It's an important moment in my life as it relates to the war. Perhaps the most exhilarating moment was not necessarily VE Day or VJ Day, when they announced that the war would be over. All the war in Japan was over, that we would not have to be sent, because the plan was that we were going to go to fight the Japanese. But the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in 1945 that we spent in services in Berlin, in a large hall where we had gathering American soldiers, British soldiers, French soldiers, Russian soldiers, American civilians, British civilians, and some survivors. And we sat together in that congregation, mixed up. We were all Jews. And my feeling at that point was, hey, Hitler, this is the greatest evidence that you lost. You're not going to kill us. And we're not going to disappear. And that was probably the most exhilarating moment during those almost 3 years in service. Okay. Afterwards, in more recent years, I realized that I had another momentous experience or benefit or effect from my military service. Before the war, living in the East in New Jersey, going to school in New York, I was privy to a lot of information, both public and less public about what was happening to Jews in Germany. And I really had an anger at Germans, German government and German people, who I felt acquiesced to this horrendous treatment. So if I were going to go to the military, I wanted to fight Germans. I didn't want to fight against Japan particularly, and I really wanted to fight Germans. Afterwards, after the experience, I now realize that I put aside my desire and my plan to become a lawyer and began to do work in the Jewish community, because I was going to help the Jews who were still alive, and I certainly was going to help the Jews who were trying to create a state. So for a short period of time, I was trying to collect guns in New York City when it was illegal. And it was illegal to ship guns from the United States to Israel. But I was collecting guns and dropping them off to provide weapons for the Israelis. After that, I worked with the Zionist movement. This is before the state was declared. And then I worked for the Zionist Youth Commission. I worked with Hadassah, and then there was a men's group called Masada and Young Judea. And I worked in Manhattan, New York, as the director of that region. Well, again, focused on Israel and survivors and chalutzim. So after the state was declared, I moved into the field of Jewish community centers and then Jewish federations. All, I guess, consciously or subconsciously focused on the welfare of Jewish people and the welfare of Israel and then the welfare of Jewish people in the United States. And that became my career. My experience took me from Stamford, Connecticut, eventually to New Orleans, where I built the center that you may have seen in the newspapers that survived the flood. And then from New Orleans, I came to the Omaha community. In New Orleans, I had been both at Federation and then was drafted from Federation to help them build the new center there. I was invited to Omaha because of my experience both in the Federation over the course of these 20 plus years, as well as my experience in being involved in previous construction of 2 Jewish community centers. The construction, the planning, the financing, and then the development of new program and new concepts. There was a recognition that this was what was needed, this was the appropriate thing to happen in Omaha. They were to move the community activity to follow where the people went. People who no longer lived around 24th Street now live west. The center needed to be west, so it was going to service our community. It was an interesting experience, to say the least. We started with relatively, at that point, relatively minimal center programming. The Federation really, on its own, ran an annual campaign and did no planning. There were no other activity other than the focus on campaign. Sure, we had the ADL, CRC, and the Home, you had the newspaper, you had the Jewish Family Services, all were committee, and the center were committees, were functional committees of the Federation. And technically, their directors were responsible to the Federation director. But in practice, these were semi-independent operations. The first task we had, and the importance that was given to it by the lay leadership, was the development of the new center. So, with a piece of land already having been selected and an initial architect having been selected, I was given the opportunity to review the material, to review the plan and the site, and suggested to them that the site was inadequate for whatever desirable program we would want to run. The site was on the east side of the slope of West Roads, where the shopping center is. It didn't allow for parking, didn't allow for ball fields, and it would have been horrendous in the winter, in the snow and ice, to be able to move. So at that point, a search, bless them, the leadership of the Federation recognized that the site was inadequate. And then we began a search for a new site. We ended up at 132nd Street, which strangely enough, two of us independently spotted at the same time. But there we had the chance to have a campus, have enough room to do all the things that we thought we would need to do. We had wonderful leadership in the lay community around this project. The community was energized, the leadership was energized. There were a number of younger people involved at Federation level who took the ball and ran with it on this project. Nick Newman, Dan Katzman, as the key leadership people, and had around them a coterie of a dozen other major significant people who did a lot of the legwork, and there was a lot of legwork to be done. I contributed to this mix, not only working and stimulation of that group of people, but the development internally of what our desirable program, what did people want to happen at the new center? And we therefore developed a study involving 300 members of our Jewish community, and used experts as a resource people to talk about all the needs that people had and what would be appropriate for us to meet. On the basis of that, a new architect was engaged who had built a center in Minneapolis, but who knew what a center was and what a center's function was. Once you said this is what you want to do, then you have the skeleton for what a center construction, what a building ought to look like. And after much massaging and pricing and all the rest, we arrived at the plan for the original center on 132nd Street. We also developed a major support group of older, historically older community leadership people, many with significant wherewithal, who became the trustees and advisors to the project. And their role was to give a different level of oversight to what we were trying to do. The rest of us were all wound up with the excitement and enthusiasm of this new thing, and they were a little more stable, and they were able to look at it more objectively. The benefit of that, in addition, was that once they signed on to the project, they also made commitments financially to the realization of the project. Well, in 1972, The plans were complete, the bids were in, and we started our fundraising. And the remarkable Omaha community, I can't underline enough how remarkable it was. In 1972, we ran a philanthropies campaign. We ran a $4 million plus building campaign, so we had no long-term debt. We had a construction loan, but it was more than covered by the amount of pledges that we had. Then we ran a 73 campaign, philanthropies, and then we ran the Yom Kippur campaign. So within a short period of time, maybe 18 months, we raised in that community more than $15 million from really a small number of people. That, in those days, that's absolutely phenomenal giving. And that's phenomenal leadership on the part of not just leaders, but average members in the community. I think one of the things that helped in terms of the Building Fund campaign and the philanthropies was the enthusiasm generated by the 300 people who were on the study committees. Of course, they were partners, and they were owners in this new project. And they could see Federation moving in the direction that they wanted. So Federation was alive and became more meaningful locally than it had been for a while. I need to tell you something about staff. After I came, and I inherited a small staff, and with a few changes. We kept most of the old staff and added a few new ones. But we ended with a group of very enthusiastic, capable, exciting, more than competent staff who were able to bring in creativity and abundance of energy to the creation of this new entity, this new center. I need to mention Molly Delman here. Not to forget anybody else, but Molly was very special in this process. When I came, Molly was the youth team worker. And then we recognized she was doing some things with seniors, and I recognized that she had a wonderful skill and relationship ability with seniors, and a very caring person. So she became the senior worker at the center. And everybody who knew Molly loved her. And Molly had the qualities of outreach that were magnificent. A wonderful staff member, wonderful cooperative person who would take other tasks that needed to be done. So she, with the addition of people like Hi Tabachnik, who came from elsewhere with experience in center operations, added much to the new quality that we were able to bring into the center. I cannot neglect the role that the editor of the Jewish Press played for me, and I think in the development of the new operation. I found this strange woman who appeared at my door one day and said, first time I met her, and said, "Am I going to get my mail?" No identification, no, nothing. But I found over the course of the time that I was there that she was smart. She had a good feel about the community. She had pretty good judgment about lots of things. And I found myself leaning more and more to use her knowledge and to use her relationship skills to learn more and to be more effective. And of course, I'm talking about Nikki. who I eventually stole out of Omaha and married, and with whom I've lived these last 30 some odd years. As Mickey noted, we moved to California from Omaha, and then 15 years ago we moved to Scottsdale when we both retired from our work. Scottsdale has been just wonderful. I came here retired. I had been doing some independent consulting on community organization and fundraising, and stopped into the local federation to say hello and all that kind of thing, and ended up with a part-time job and then a full-time job. So I spent 4 years in different amounts of time here at Federation, which was great because it helped us get to know the new community and who the people were and what some of the forces were. We've had, in addition to our children here, we've had the pleasure of a very interesting and desirable synagogue affiliation here with an outstanding rabbi, Rabbi William Burke at Temple High. And I've had the pleasure of serving on committees and then on the board and then on the officer list as vice president, and refused the nomination for president. But the synagogue involvement was something I could do here that I never was able to do before when I was in community work, because where I should not have been labeled as this kind of a member or that kind of a member. And that's been a source of real joy and importance, and a sense, again, of continuing making some contribution, my experience and my knowledge, and so on. We still study, we still do Jewish studies at our synagogue, and that's been real fun for us. And again, we meet all kinds of nice young people, which makes you feel good about where we're going in terms of a Jewish community, in terms of a Jewish future. One thing we omitted when we talked about our family, in addition to these great children and wonderful grandchildren, we also have a family consisting of 12 dogs, 1 cat, and 1 horse. And I won't try and give you all their names. To our family, let me close and say, life is great, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. I've enjoyed all of my life with Mickey. It's been a wonderful 31 plus years, and I think it was a wise choice that we made. We couldn't be prouder of our children. We think they're good people, and we see in them, we would like to see in them pieces of ourselves. And we just hope they keep on growing and they keep on feeling good about themselves and doing good things. As Mickey noted, our grandchildren are our hope for the future, and they're our continuity. And we see sparks of this in every one of them. Each is different, each is unique, but they are all really very wonderful, wonderful people. And I'll close with our family motto of, we love you all up to the sky. Thank you.